Well, we are going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. I wanted to welcome everyone to tonight's webinar. I am your host and co-presenter, Dr. Lauren Levine. As of this morning, we had close to 200 people that were registered for the webinar, and I see a lot of people are logging in right now. I'm going to talk just to do a little brief intro for a few minutes here. Then I'm going to turn the mic over to my co-presenter, Rohit, and what's somewhat different about these webinars that I do with Rohit is that you get a lot of back and forth between the two of us, which I think is great. Now, Rohit is really an expert on all the regulatory regulations and rules when it comes to HIPAA. I've got a really good handle on the IT, and the technical end of things, and I think it's going to work out well. We certainly encourage you to ask questions during the webinar. Most of you have been on webinars in the past. For those of you who have not, you have a GoToWebinar control panel on your screen. If you just type in your question as you think about them, we will get to those questions when we're done speaking. We typically don't do it until the end. And obviously we can't take verbal questions when we've got a couple hundred people on the call. But we will certainly do our best to get to all those questions this evening. As with all the webinars, I am recording this webinar, so sometime in the next 24 to 48 hours, I will send out a link that you can download and view the entire webinar at your convenience. So don't worry if you can't make it to the end or get distracted. Of course, no one can be distracted because the content's going to be so great. But if you do need to review it, you will have that option. We didn't advertise this when we sent out the invitations, I don't believe, but I am able to provide AGD PACE continuing education credits, an hour and a half of credits. You do need to be live for the webinar. Unfortunately, we have no way of tracking attendance for people that just download it and view it afterwards. So as long as you're here, you will be sent that CE form as well. And with that, I wanted to go ahead and get started. Now, as I said, for those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Lauren Levine. Many people know me as the digital dentist. I was a practicing periodontist for 10 years. Along the way, I became certified in computer repair and networking. I have a couple of HIPAA designations as well. I work with offices all over North America who need help with their IT services, whether it's hardware, software. Of course, HIPAA compliance is a big part of that now, going chartless or paperless. But that's basically been my MO for the last few years. I am joined tonight and very fortunate to be joined by Rohit Joshi. Rohit and I have done a number of webinars over the last years together. I really enjoy presenting with him. He's certainly very qualified to be on these webinars. He's held senior executive positions with life science and technology companies, both in the US and Canada. He's really been focusing a lot on using technology for effective communications. He's got a bachelor's degree in biology, a master's degree in medical science, which specializes in surgery and orthopedics, and he's an attorney as well. He's got a bachelor's degree in law, so that really gives him, I think, a really unique perspective when it comes to talking about HIPAA. Because as I was talking about earlier, there's two facets to it. There's all the regulatory, the rules, and all the laws and administrative stuff that you need to follow, but there's also a technical end of this as well that I think is really critical. So I'm just going to give you a brief outline of what we'll be talking about, and then I'm going to turn the mic and the screen over to him. I think we have to define what exactly a breach is. You've heard about all these breaches in the past, but what exactly is a breach and why is this critical? We'll certainly talk about that. We've put together our top 10 lists of the worst dental breaches, and this is not a theoretical list where we're going to talk about things that can happen. I know there's a lot of HIPAA consultants out there who maybe use some scare tactics. We're going to give you some real-world examples. These are things that have actually happened, and when you see the size of some of the penalties and fines that have happened with physicians and dentists, it really is scary stuff. I mean, it's not a scare tactic. It just happens to be the reality. One area that we really find where there's a lot of breaches, which we'll be talking about this evening, is using insecure email. HIPAA is very specific about the fact that you need to be taking proper precautions to protect patient confidentiality with email. So let's talk about an option, about an inexpensive and great way that you can send your mail securely without running afoul of HIPAA rules and regulations. We've got some special pricing that they were kind enough to extend as well. And then we're going to make sure that we leave some time for Q&A for both myself and Rohit. So at this point, what I want to do is turn the mic over to him. I'm going to change it to his screen as well. And Rohit, always a pleasure to be on a webinar with you. And take it away, and I'll be joining in as necessary.
That sounds great, Dr. Levine. I'm looking forward to addressing everyone today. We have a lot we're going to share today, and I think that we're going to try to keep the pace as fast as we can, because I think there's lots of good information here. And as you mentioned, really something that we want to do is try to be practical in our discussions. You know, I think that when we're talking about theoretical laws, we're talking about theoretical things, it's easy to get lost in that, to be honest. And so I think what's interesting about what we're going to do today is get right down to the practical and use those as lessons learned, because I think what I've certainly appreciated when I'm looking at what's happening in the industry and what's happening to the dental environment, one of the things that I'm appreciating is these things could happen to any one of us. You know, I certainly have an increased respect for what HIPAA compliance means because of my background, but I'll tell you, the things that have happened to other practices are things that could happen to any practice. And so I'm looking forward to this one, because I think we haven't done this one before, and it'll be fun. So let's get to the next slide here, and we'll take it from there. So the first question, and I'll just wait for the slides to catch up to me here.
We're on it.
The first question is, you know, what is a HIPAA breach? And I think that without getting too technical, we want to make sure that we're all on the same playing field with the definition. So, and this is a quote, it's an impermissible use or disclosure under the privacy rule that comprises the security or the privacy of protected health information. So what that means is in any circumstance where that information has gotten missing or you've lost care and control over that information. And the important part about it is a few lines after that paragraph, when anything goes missing or is no longer in your care control, it's presumed to be a breach. And that's really, it's very legal language to say now it's up to the practice to convince the bodies that be that in fact it wasn't a breach if they want to make that defense. So it's a large burden is how it's expressed, because the presumption is so clear. So that's what we're going to talk about today, is show real life scenarios where people have lost patient information or just lost control of patient information by not keeping it very close. Now, if you do have a breach, you have to do these following things. The first is the dental practice must notify all affected individuals, and you would expect that. So as a practice, you have to reach out to everyone that has been affected. There's in fact a media notice that has to be put as well. So in the event that over 500 people, which most practice management systems, I'd say almost every practice I've been in has more than 500 people. In addition to notifying those individuals, you have to actually publish it in a newspaper that has a note to the effect that you have lost people's protected health information. Further to that, there's a notice to the secretary, which keeps track of all of the breaches. And in the event that there is a business associate that you're doing business with and they've had a breach, they must also notify the covered entity following the discovery of a breach. I want to refer back to a a webinar we did many, many months ago now. I think maybe almost a year ago, Dr. Levine, maybe a year and a bit.
Yeah.
And it was actually, we spoke with the office manager for a practice that actually went through a HIPAA breach. And their scenario was not unlike some of the things that we're going to learn about today. It was a situation where the office manager came to the office and, of course, wondered why the door was open. And as soon as she looked around, she recognized that many of the computers had been stolen. Once that happened, the chain reaction of events is actually it's startling, and it's worth, if you do have an opportunity and you do have some curiosity with this, for our users to go to our website and they can just search up the particular webinar and download it.
Hey, Rohit.
Yes.
I just wanted to, add one thing on that previous slide, just real briefly, is that, a lot of times when I'm working with offices and they're talking about their concerns with HIPAA, they talk about the potential fines and penalties that they're facing. And to me, that breach notification rule is probably the most devastating, because when you send out that letter to every patient or record, you're going to lose patients. Offices that we've worked with that have gone through this, they've talked about 20, 25, 30% patient loss, but compared to fines and penalties, that patient loss, I think, could potentially be some of the most devastating thing that an office has to go through.
Yeah, absolutely, and just to harken back to that webinar that we gave, certainly the most devastating thing for the office manager was having to field calls and people literally screaming at her for having breached their data. And she said that it took even as far as 6 months later, where she was still being, yelled at, unfortunately, and she ultimately left the practice. I think it was that devastating for her, and so there's the loss of reputation for sure that follows all of this stuff, and is not actually calculated in the figures that you that I'm showing now on the screen. So these figures that I've got here on the screen talk about the basic breach dollars. So if we go from the top to the bottom, you can see that the top three categories, which are more than $1 million, $500,000 to $1 million, and $200,000 to $500,000, comprise a very large section, a very large percentage of all of the costs for a HIPAA breach. Now, some of that is fines and penalties, so that there is part of that is included in there. But in fact, a lot of the costs also come from having to do things for the patients that up that cost. So the round figure that's used quite a bit in these calculations is approximately $200 per victim, and that would include the fine, the cost of the mailing, the cost of the newspaper advertising, the cost, in fact, to pay for that patient to have a credit service for the course of a full year, where the practice would pay for that patient, I think it's $30 per patient, just to have a credit report monitor to ensure that there isn't fraud within that year, with the presumption that after a year it's unlikely that there will be any fraud. So we've used that number, $200, in our calculations, because it's not always obvious when you look at some of the references and the source material. It's not always obvious how much the actual cost is, but we've used this general term to be able to put some numbers to this. So let's case is that there was a single victim, and the reason we put it on this list of the top 10 is because of the amount of press this particular case received. So even though the actual cost is not severe, the loss of reputation, the media frenzy that started up, we thought it was worthy to include. Now, here's the summary of the case. The dentist of that practice had asked his staff to flag this individual's case, as well as any other patient, with a red sticker and the word AIDS on the outside cover. Now you may have heard about this. This again is a really, it's one that's talked about quite a bit. What's interesting about this case is that the patient actually complained, and it's something that I think, Dr. Levine, I mean, you and I have talked about this before, where there are lots of patients and all patients aren't created equal. And so we have to expect that patients will react in very different ways. Now in this particular case, the patient complained to the HHS. And once they complained, the HHS is actually obligated to do their investigation. And in fact, I did find that this dentist had flagged all patients, their cases with a red sticker. Now the thing that this breaches from a HIPAA perspective is there's a kind of an unwritten rule, which is only those that need to know should know. And so the point being that if you have a red sticker on the outside of a file with AIDS on it, everybody from the cleaning staff to another patient that's looking at that file potentially that's sitting on a counter, everyone is going to know that that patient name or that patient has AIDS. And that violates one of the basic premises of HIPAA, which is, again, only those people that need to know should know. So the OCR required the practice to revise its policies, its operating procedures, and then actually the patient met with that practice and received a written apology. Again, not the biggest financial cost as in terms of the actual loss, but I can tell you if you do a quick search, you'll be able to find this case. It's very famous in terms of breach.
So Rohit.
Yes.
Yeah, we did get a question about that. So, someone was asking, so if, obviously we need to protect our staff, make sure that they know about the high-risk patients. So how would you suggest that an office protect their staff without something like a red AIDS sticker on the front of the chart?
In this particular case, the resolution was actually that red sticker be placed on the inside of that physical file. And so it's not a big change. I think it's pretty reasonable, but at least if it's on the inside, people walking by that file, people who don't need to know wouldn't know.
Yep.
Only if that file was physically opened would they be able to find that information.
Sure. Okay, that makes
question.
Sense. Yep.
Now the next one is one which happened in Pennsylvania. In this case, the breach was a cost of over $1 million because there was over almost 15,000 patients whose data was affected. What was interesting is this one was actually through physical mail, and we don't often see that. Dr. Levine, you and I have spent so much time talking about email. The fact is that in this case it was actually a priority mail envelope that when it was sent, it arrived open. And when it arrived open, there were pages missing, and that was clarified. So once that was notified that there was in fact pages missing, that the envelope was open, it is considered a breach. And now it was up to that company whose data that was to substantiate the fact or to try to argue the fact that it may not have been a breach. Well, that's a losing proposition, because again, the presumption is if that data is missing, there has been a breach. And so this particular company followed the requirements. They reviewed internal systems. They fixed the problem in the future. They offered free credit monitoring to every one of those nearly 15,000 patients, and was, again, completely changed their internal processes for how that type of information was sent. Now this next case, number 8 on our list, is sort of like it's the Grinch that stole computers and toothbrushes. So this happened a few years ago in California, and there was 1,400 patients that lost data. Estimated cost we have is about $280,000. And again, this was a dental practice. So a week before Christmas, the practice was broken into, and everything from toothbrushes to Game Boys to everything was stolen. Most important, and that was stolen from the practice. All of the what that laptop had was all of the practice's patient data. Immediately, the practice reported the breach, and in January received a letter back which said, you know, here's fines that will be levied. So in this example, you know, the remediation was again, they had to pay for the credit reports. They had to do all of the notifications as you would expect, and further to that, they also had to pay for the credit reports and credit for ongoing for those patients for a year. So we estimated this cost at around $280,000. Unfortunately, we weren't able to find, you know, an exact number here, or even what the fine was. We weren't able to find that. But let's say at the bare minimum, it's $280,000.
So Rohit, I mean, wouldn't someone be able to make the argument that, hey, you know, it was theft? I mean, the practice had no control over that, but are they still liable even if they didn't do anything specifically wrong?
Yeah, you know, this is probably the biggest challenge that we have when we talk to practices, and I know that you've come up to it again as well, Dr. Levine. You know, the office, the dental office, because they've got control of that patient information, they have an obligation to protect it from theft, interestingly enough. So even if that laptop was sitting in someone's car, or even if it was lost at an airport, as soon as that information, if that laptop was not encrypted, they are liable. Now, encryption is something we'll talk about in a little bit, but that becomes the key to a lot of people making sure that they never have a breach. And I'll give you a chance. You've actually got quite a bit more experience than I do around it. I'll give you a chance to talk about that a little bit later when we talk about how do we not step in, how do the practices that we advise make sure that they don't fall into the same sort of a problem.
Yeah, I would add, because I'm familiar with this case, and I know that the problem was that the practice was under the impression that their practice management software used an encrypted database, and besides the fact that that really wasn't the case, most offices have far more data on their computers than just the practice management data. They got images, they've got QuickBooks, they got Invisalign, they've got all kinds of electronic protected health information. And you know, you can't just depend on the practice management software saying, well, you know, our database is encrypted. It's not enough. And as you said, we'll talk about that at the end, about things that offices can and should do to try to avoid these breaches.
Yeah, thanks. You know, it's such an amazing challenge because, you know, no one here did anything wrong, and I think that's part of the reason we wanted to do this webinar is it's not someone doing anything wrong in the sense that, you know, I'm sure they locked their practice and the practice was done very well, and it's not even a reflection of how the practice operates. But from a technology perspective, their data was available for anybody who was able to get to that laptop. The data simply just wasn't encrypted. The next one on the list, and this one's pretty close to my day job, has to do with a website hack. You know, there's a number of practices, dental practices, that have websites that do everything from, you know, apply for a job on that website, fill out a patient form on the website, maybe give an update to what they would like in terms of a schedule or their next appointment. Well, in this particular case, the website was hacked, and they were absolutely able to grab 3 databases containing information from old employment records other discount plans, patient financing applications, all of that was accessed because that's the type of information that this dental practice was allowing its patients to do from the website, and not just patients, but actually employment records. So this was a very disappointing case, obviously, because people put that type of information to be more accessible to people who want to get in touch with that practice, which we all want. We all want to have our name out there. We all want to be as interactive as we can. But in this example, again, the information was not encrypted, and once it was compromised, all of that data was able to be pulled. They estimate about 2,860 victims. In this case, victims is appropriate because not all the people were even patients. Some of them are just applying for a job. And for sure, the Department of Health and Human Services forced a changing of the internal processes. The practice offered free identity and credit monitoring service to the victim, and of course went through a whole bunch of other remediation to make sure that that wouldn't happen again. Now, Dr. Levine, you I'm sure have seen lots of websites that go down this road. I don't know if you've got any particular advice for people who are listening to the webinar around this.
Yeah, don't do it. No, I mean, to me, a website really is a great tool. I think every practice should have it. I think it's a fantastic way to get information about your practice. But unless you really have a lot of control over the database and what's going on with it, there's so many other ways. I mean, people can fill out forms and they can be sent securely to other locations by secure mail. I mean, there's a lot of ways that you can handle it. But I certainly, typically when it comes to a website, most practices don't really have any control over the website. They don't know if the company that's managing their website is HIPAA compliant. You've got to do some due diligence to figure out if you are going to have forms that are saved on there, what's happening to those forms. And it's typically a lot easier just to have, get that information forwarded to you as an email or something like that, and that way you've got control over the content.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I know that we've got thousands of patients that use our secure mail service exactly for this purpose, so that before they arrive at the practice, they can fill out the forms, they can get all that information. It's confidential, and all of that information is secure from any hacking in this way. Number 6 on our list. In this case, there was 3,224 patients that were affected. This was another case of theft. And there was a general dental practice, also in California, Dr. Levine, burglarized, and servers containing PHI was stolen. Once that information was known to be lost, it starts that series of things, notices, and actions that I mentioned earlier. We estimate this cost at around $600,000. Again, that cost, it doesn't include loss of patients, loss of reputation. It's an actual cost to that practice. All right, the next one, item number 5 on the list, is authorized access to files. So in this case, there was about 7,500 patients that were affected at an estimated cost of over $1 million. And this is within the past year. In this case, there was an oral surgeon's practice that whose documents were released to an unauthorized individual, and there's not that much information as to how that happened. But within those documents, there was patient names, addresses, telephone numbers, email addresses, date of birth, and they may in fact have contained information pertaining to their dental care. In fact, once the breach was notified, they went through all of the steps required, and again, this one cost over $1 million. I think this is a good opportunity really to talk about who has access to your information. And in HIPAA requirements, anybody that has access or is working with you to do anything with those files must have with you a business associates agreement. And what the business associates agreement does, it essentially ensures the practice that whoever their business partners are maintaining the same standard of privacy that the practice is. And so it protects the practice by having these business associates sign this agreement because essentially it says, yeah, we're certified to be, it's okay to work with them. I know companies like ours and your software companies, all of them ought to have a business associates agreement with your practice. And if they don't, it puts the practice at significant risk, like this example.
Yeah, one thing I would just add so people understand is that anyone that's involved in the continuum of care would not be considered a business associate. So if you're sending some records to a referring office, a specialist office, obviously you need to use some type of secure mail system to do that, but you do not need a BA agreement with that other office because they're involved in the ongoing care of that patient. But certainly the software company, IT company, your accountant, practice management consultant, anyone that logs onto your computers or has access to computers, you absolutely need to have a business associate agreement with them.
Yeah, exactly. Now this was an interesting case. There was 9,309 patients. There was in this case a theft and it resulted in over $1 million worth of damages. In this case, there was a desktop computer that was stolen, and this contained protected health information. This is a sad case, but you can sort of understand why, if the actual cost of the breach was over $1 million, in this example, the practice actually ended up going into bankruptcy, and it's again a very difficult scenario and an unpleasant one to think about, but the consequences are real. And I think that that's sort of the sad truth of this entire thing is that we, unfortunately, for the cost of doing a few things in the right way, there's lots of potential liability that can result. Number 3 on the list is one where there was about 30 years of patient data from an orthodontic practice in Alabama. It was over 20,000 patient records, and early when we were setting up the company, I was working with some very large practices, and in fact I worked with one that had 43,000 patient records, and it was a sole practitioner. He had in fact bought 2 or 3 practices in the creation of his practice, and every time had taken the data and kind of aggregated it. Well, I think this really starts to question whether or not that's a good idea. If you have a lot of inactive patients, they will still have to be taken care of if in fact that data gets breached. So it's just something to think about. In this case, not unlike many of the other cases, a computer server was stolen and it contained 30 years of patient data from the orthodontic practice. So not only did it have sort of the practice management system data, but there was also intraoral photographs, facial photographs. Although the server was password protected, the server itself was not encrypted. And it's an important distinction. I think many times the layperson will feel that because they've got a password that is complicated, that they have in fact protected their servers. That's not actually the case. Password protection is one layer and a very thin layer of protection for the server. In fact, the server has to be, to be safe under the HIPAA regulations, that server actually has to be encrypted. And what encryption means is that they take all of that data and they put it through a mathematical formula so that if someone unauthorized gets access to that information, they actually won't be able to do anything with it. And so so when you're working with your IT teams, ensure that you've got more than just password protection, because that's not going to prevent you from the HIPAA liabilities. Anything on this one, Dr. Levine? I'm sure you've seen lots of this when you're in practices.
Yeah, and I wouldn't want to downplay the importance of a password. I mean, HIPAA certainly says that you should have, a password policy, which would typically mean that there's a certain level of complexity, that you change the password on a regular basis. I think, you've got to have that in place, obviously. But from a breach notification standpoint, a password doesn't do you any good if you're not encrypted. And we'll talk about this a little bit towards the end. Certainly there are some people who say, well, my understanding is that encryption is an addressable concern. It's not mandatory. And while by true definition that's the case, when you think about all these breaches that we're talking about and how easy it is to avoid that by having encryption in place, I really could never make an argument for a practice that they shouldn't have encryption. It just doesn't make sense. You can buy self-encrypting hard drives with the server. You can use a software program called BitLocker, which is built into Windows. I mean, there's lots of ways to do it. So I would always recommend both, that you have a good password policy in place and that you encrypt it. And then for sure, you're going to be, you're covering your you-know-what when it comes to the breach notification.
I think that's a great point about the addressable concern. That comes up when we've spoken about it as well with some of our customers, and you can see just from the top 10 that we're showing here, it's not an addressable concern because these practices were fined and had huge losses. If it was an addressable concern, we'd see practices getting away with it, if you will. And so we know that it's not going to stand up under scrutiny. Well, this is one where, again, Dr. Levine, I know that you and I have talked about this, but this is such a huge challenge because I believe that this is, it's something that requires a level of IT sophistication. And so in this particular case, there was 21,000 patients in Texas, and there was a theft, which we've seen many times already. In this particular case, the backup drive was unencrypted. I don't know if the original drive was unencrypted, but in this case, it was the backup drives that were stolen from a safe. And on that backup drive, there's 21,000 patient names, contacts, insurance information, social security numbers, and so on. Now, in the articles that we had, we didn't actually, there wasn't a direct correlation between the practice closing and this breach, but from my perspective, it seems like a pretty consequential event. This is a real challenge. And I've seen this many times where we've got a backup, the backup is unencrypted, and it's either put in someone's pocket and taken home, but on the way it's been lost, or there isn't a real plan to keep that backup secure. So in this example, and in every other example, we want to emphasize again the necessity for an encrypted system, whether they be your main systems or your backup drives. Now, Dr. Levine, I think you and I have talked specifically about backup encryption before. I think you've actually got some services that you've recommended before.
Yes, certainly. And one thing I would add here, we've only listed the top 10 here, but if people really want to see what's out there, Office of Civil Rights has created a web page, and we affectionately call it the Wall of Shame. And if you Google HIPAA Wall of Shame, it'll take you right there. It lists around 1,300, 1,400 reported breaches that are currently out there. Backup, loss or theft of an unencrypted backup is far and away the #1 reason for a breach. And this is so easily avoided. Certainly one of the things that we recommend for our clients, if you're worried about it, just eliminate the human part of it. We typically would recommend a two-pronged approach where you have a local backup in your office that's more or less a copy of your server that could be updated every 15 minutes. And then the part that goes off-site, which HIPAA does require, they have all kinds of rules and regulations about the backup being retrievable and that you test it and verify it. Use an online backup for that, and it's going to eliminate the human component. It's going to eliminate your concerns about it. This is something that we do for all of our clients, and people are more than welcome to email me or just go onto my website, shoot me some your information. I'll be happy to tell you more about it. But It is such an easily avoided situation, either by eliminating these external hard drives completely from your protocol or encrypting the drive. But it just, in this day and age, there's no reason that practitioners should be worried about something like this.
I couldn't agree more. That's for sure from a frequency standpoint. I've seen more unencrypted backup failures or loss than I have any other single method of loss. So number one here is sued by the state. In this case, there was 5,600 patients that were affected. The cost was over $1 million just in terms of trying to get the patient's data restored. But the state actually sued this dentist for an additional $12,000 for mishandling these records. Now, I've read a couple of different accounts of what actually happened, and so I'm a bit concerned about saying exactly what the sequence of events was that led to this. But it appears as though this dentist, this office, hired a third party to dispose of patient records. Less than a week later, 60 boxes of patient records from the clinic were found discarded in a dumpster, not shredded, not taken care of. Now, again, the details around this one are a bit vague, but this goes back to something I said earlier, which is make sure that the people that you're doing business with have business associates agreements. And if they don't, and if they're at all connected with your patient records, you've assumed all of that liability. And that's a huge challenge. If the person you're working with doesn't know what a business associates agreement is, they're the wrong company to work with. Because anybody that's handling that HIPAA data, the data that companies like ours handle, companies like Dr. Levine handle, you can guarantee that they know the liability that's involved, that you hope that their systems are up to place. They certainly are putting their necks on the line with respect to their systems. I can tell you that every one of our employees has actually gone through HIPAA training so that they're understood about the importance of privacy and the requirement for privacy. Anything on this one, Dr. Levine, or shall I slide into
move on. I think
the next few slides?
I want to point out, because a lot of times, in my area of expertise, which is obviously the IT end of things, we're always talking about the electronic patient records, which is the security rule. But as people have noticed with a number of these breaches, paper is still out there, and it's still a patient record. So you can't ignore those charts. At some point, as we're all kind of moving towards a chartless or paperless environment, and you're figuring out what to do with your paper charts, those things have to be handled properly.
Absolutely. So this is just kind of a summary of some of the HIPAA breaches from 2009 to 2015, and it's difficult to put this much information onto a graph. So let me just highlight a couple of things. What we spent most of today talking about is encryption, and we've talked about different ways that information can be breached from various different sort of devices, or paths. So if we look at the email component, you can see how that could be hacked, how you can lose that from improper disposal of email, how there might be unauthorized access to that, and that's what that legend at the bottom is meant to show you. So there's a number of breaches, and you can see how many victims on the left-hand side, just based on a summary of those of that data. So I think the ones that we've talked a lot about are the email, the desktop computer, the network server, and in fact, something that just as Dr. Levine mentioned, a lot of times people in our business, we deal with so much electronic data, we often forget that a lot of breaches still happen by inappropriate handling of paper or film. Of course, the laptop, the EMR, and portable devices. Now, how do you stay out of trouble? And so this list is meant to help you learn from all of those mistakes. So item number one, data encryption, and I think, Dr. Levine, maybe I've said it every slide, and if I haven't said it enough, then I'll say it one more time. Make sure your data is encrypted, whether it be on a portable device, a USB stick, for example, a thumb drive, as it were, desktops, servers, and make sure the email is encrypted as a matter, just as a must-have. The second is from a data disposal standpoint. Ensure that any film or even portable devices, laptops, desktop servers, any of that, or email, if you're getting rid of that account, if you're getting rid of that desktop, if you're disposing of that information, you must ensure that that information is absolutely wiped. And I can tell you with regular email, it's very difficult. This even, very interesting case that didn't come up because it was a medical practice, but it was where someone was sending faxes, and they disposed of the fax machine, and what most people don't recognize is that many advanced fax machines have hard drives. So all of that information was actually stored on the fax machine, and when they tried to dispose of that, they were caught and fined because a lot of that protected health information was in fact still on that fax machine. Unique user access, and this really looks towards having auditable records. Who in fact touched the patient record? Who has access to the patient record? And again, following that theory that only those individuals that must have access should have access. So in this case, who has access to the film? How about the portable devices like the USB drives? How about your laptops? Who has access to your email? And how secure is that access? And if you have a shared inbox for your practice and you're dealing with protected health information with that, there's probably a challenge, and we ought to talk about that. And finally, don't simply exchange film, portable devices, and email. And by don't exchange, what we mean is treat that as very confidential. It's not something that you want to lose the chain of custody or lose care and control over. And finally on the list, make sure you're working with business associates who value that data security, have HIPAA compliance, and are willing to sign those agreements with you. If you don't have a business associates agreement with your email provider, you're in breach. If you don't have a business associates agreement with the IT group that's installing your server and maintaining your servers, you're in breach. Or you could be in breach, rather, if in fact some of that data goes missing. So make sure that you go through your records and have all of those files up to date. I know that we have some practices that do this on an annual basis. They'll ask us to re-sign our business associates agreement with them just so that they're current, and they get to remind us of our obligations handling patient data. Dr. Levine, anything on this list that maybe I've missed?
No, I think we hit most of the main points here. As I said, with data encryption, I think it's important to understand that it's so easy to do. There was a question that actually came up here. Someone asked about, is there a way to know that the server's encrypted? Now, there are ways to do it. Oftentimes, it's not easy. It's somewhat technical. The bottom line is, if you don't know that your server's encrypted, it probably isn't. Unless you bought self-encrypting drives from the manufacturer. Like we get our servers from Dell, and we get them with self-encrypting drives, and it's an added expense. But unless you ordered it that way, encryption will be turned off. So if you don't remember ever paying for your IT company to come in and encrypt it, then you're probably not. So if you have a specific question, you can call up my office at any point. One of my techs would be happy to log in with your permission to your server and let you know if that's the case. But if you don't remember paying for it, then you probably don't have it.
Yeah, it's not something that happens, typically. So I think that's a good gauge. If you're not paying for it, you probably haven't.
Yep.
And by the way, that's not to say that this is an expensive thing to get something encrypted. In fact, it could be free, but you still would have paid for the service to have it done.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm going to take, I think, less than 5 minutes to show you a little bit about our software. it is called Secure Mail, and its purpose is actually to protect all of the users, the practice, as well as the patient, as well as anybody that you're doing business with. The goal is to protect you from any sort of non-compliant perspective. So it's we have designed it to be easy to use. Nothing here should be daunting or concerning in any which way. And so actually doing a demo of email sounds a bit ridiculous, but there are a few things here that we do differently. So I'm just going to take a few minutes, just kind of show you around the screen. For sure, if any of the people here are listening to this webinar would like an individualized demo, we can show you how it'll work in your practice. Just write demo in the comment box, and we will reach out. We'll set up some time with you and show you in your practice how this works. So what you've seen here is I've just logged in to my portal, and guess what? It looks like email. So I've got the very things that you would recognize, like composing a message, an inbox, trash, and sent. It's exactly as you would expect it to be. So I'm going to show you a little bit of difference, though, in how our secure mail works over some of the other systems that you might have available, and for sure what's different between our system and email. So in this example, you can see that the email message, there's two sections. One's called email, and the second bit is called secure mail. The reason we've designed it like this is we actually want to be able to send this email to someone's regular email address. If I'm communicating with Dr. Levine, I know that his address is something at digitaldentist.com. Well, rather than having to monitor a whole other email address that happens to be secure, we want him to continue to use that one because that's the one he's used to using it. It works on his phone, it works on his Outlook, it works everywhere he's working. So this particular part of the message, this email message, will be sent to that particular spot. And what he's mentioning here in this message is, please review these patient records, probably a good candidate for an implant. So what's interesting here that you'll notice is there's no protected health information that's exchanged in that email message. Pretty important. Now, on the bottom part of that message, you can see that there's a name, Dr. Abel, or Mr. Abel rather, 41 years old, sinus infection, and lots of images that are here. So let's see the types of images that are available. So in this example, because again we want to keep track of who's got access to these images and how those are working, we actually open this up within a viewer within Secure Mail, and that's a little bit different too. So we've built a viewer that's also HIPAA compliant. And so the interesting thing about this is I can actually draw directly on this image. Something like this is a problem. What's interesting about this is now that I have annotated this image, a note will go back to the person who sent me the message and say that, listen, this person has just annotated that image, you might want to have a look. And it will automatically send a link so that they can have a look at what I've written there. The interesting thing as well is, you know, with as much 3D imaging that's going on now, there's lots of opportunity to share STL images, and it happens quite a bit, particularly if you're working with a lab that happens to use Digitizer to review the restoration, or in fact someone that's using an oral scanner. What we've done is we've actually built in the ability to view these files on an STL viewer. Now I've got this, it takes a few minutes just to load up these images because you'll see how complex they are. But it's something that most programs you wouldn't ever have the opportunity to do the types of things that I'm doing here, where you can look at the occlusion, you can actually get rid of some parts of the image and have a look at how the whole thing is working for you. And that's included free so that communication and collaboration can occur in the dental field. Now, I will show you briefly what it's like to compose a message because it's pretty easy. So I will I will start addressing the message. This person's information comes up. I can put an a subject line like referral. And then I can write something here in the email message that I know will be sent to the regular email address, so not private information. Now in the bottom part of it, again, I can now include all sorts of private information because I know that this information is going to be secure. I can also attach images, and I can do a drag and drop, but in this case I'm just going to look at my desktop. I think I've probably got some demo files there, and so I'm just going to grab a handful of these and open them up. It'll take a few seconds for them just to update. Now, the important part of this is, again, once I hit the send message, this is going to send all of that information to the recipient. It will actually send it to them, send that link in their normal email address. They'll be able to click on it. They'll be able to access all that information. Okay. And that is the end of the demo. Now, I've just spoken to my office mate here who said that that didn't quite show up all the way. Well, anyways, we will we can finish that demo in person when we call. I don't want to take much more time, but that's about as easy as it gets in terms of our demos, because it really is normal email with the added benefit of the security. Now, what's interesting is that we've got about 700 new people joining this a month. And all of that happens without much support because it is just like email. So you don't have to worry about trying to train your team. You don't have to worry about assigning new email addresses. You simply just automatically integrate that into your practice. Now, we do have a benefit for all of our listeners of the webinar. Typically, if you go to our website, we've got a $39.99 a month. In fact, with Dr. Levine, it will be $34.99, but we need you to sign up by October 31st. The discount code at the bottom here is Levine. And so please, when you go there, they'll ask you for a discount code. Remember the code Levine. And if in fact you have any trouble with that, please reach out to us. That $5 per month savings will automatically be applied. Now for that $34.99 a month fee, you get 5 email addresses to use within your practice. So that will cover the entire practice. I did want to mention one thing. You know, as Dr. Levine mentioned, we do this regularly. We've got lots of webinar videos. We will ensure to make sure that we answer a lot of the attendee questions that we've received and that you'll hear. We will also include a HIPAA compliance checklist and a HIPAA compliance software checklist. So if you would like this package of information, please write something like info inside of the chat box, and we'll make sure that you receive all of this. We also send you a notice of privacy practices, which is something that you should have visibly in your practice, and a patient privacy practice, so they recognize your commitment as a practice to their patient privacy. Dr. Levine, on that note, I think we should open it up for questions, unless you want to add something else.
No, we got a lot of questions, so I want to make sure we get to all those questions.
Let's get started then. I feel I should have spoken a little faster, so let's get rolling.
That's okay. Yeah, and some people have mentioned we've been having some issues with GoToWebinar. I mean, the bad thing about any type of webinar that uses a huge international network is that sometimes if there's problems with the network, it affects everyone. So I noticed a couple times, you know, Rohit, your voice was kind of, it wasn't cutting out, it was more just delaying, you know, it coming through. But people tell me it's for my voice as well. So we apologize about that. There's not much we can do about it. Okay, let's get to some of the questions. There were a couple questions about, because some of your slides had something about PIPEDA and PHIPAA. Can you just mention quickly for your Canadian listeners the main differences, if there are any?
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. So we're quite familiar with the Canadian laws. As you know, we're based in Canada, and so we have not only achieved HIPAA compliance from an audited perspective, so we've been third-party audited by security metrics. We've also achieved compliance in Canada from a data perspective. I would tell you, Dr. Levine, that in fact the HIPAA compliance is quite a bit more prescriptive and more stringent. Safe to say that because we are HIPAA compliant and because we have specific data storage rules for Canada, we're also compliant under the PHIPAA laws as well as the PIPEDA laws in Canada.
Okay. What about, going back, so some of these questions obviously came in earlier in the presentation. You were talking about that red sticker. What if someone put a sticker on the outside of the chart that didn't say AIDS? It was just a plain red sticker. Do you think that would still be a potential violation of privacy?
I do. I would argue that as soon as that secret code is broken, it provides a real problem because for people who have left the practice, let's say you had someone working for you and then they left the practice. Well, they're no longer bound by needing that information. If they came to the practice as a casual observer and looked around and they could tell if someone had AIDS or some other disease or disorder or some other information because they knew the code, I think you're still in trouble.
Yeah.
Because now you've got people who don't need to know that information, knowing that information.
Okay. What are your feelings about a locked file cabinet? Do you think something like that is safe?
I would say it's good. I would say that it's as good as you might be able to get for a physical box. So I would try to ensure that you still had some way of anchoring that to the ground or to the wall in a way that it would be difficult to take. I know that it is not good enough for electronic media. So if someone breaks into that filing cabinet and steals a laptop, that laptop still better be encrypted.
Yeah.
Because it's not going to stand up by just being in their locked filing cabinet. By analogy, if it was just in the locked practice, it should be fine, but we know it's not.
Right. I would add to that we have a number of practices that we work with that against our recommendation, they use a quote-unquote fireproof safe. I think it's important to understand, number one of the tenets of HIPAA is that when it comes to a backup, it has to be quote-unquote retrievable. And by all definitions, that means off-site. A fireproof safe is not melt-proof. And anything that's in that safe will probably melt if the office burns down. So you really want to get it off-site. But as you mentioned, it's just not enough. And I would agree that we need to look at other things as well. What are your feelings about sign-in sheets? People that, the patients, when they first come in, they sign in and someone kind of crosses off their name. Do you have any hesitation about people still using those?
Oh, yes. I've seen that quite a bit, in fact, and I advise strongly against it. And I've seen some innovative solutions and then that label is peeled off. I think some of those solutions are much better. Again, should the people in the waiting room know who's dentist all day long?
Yeah.
Well, it's the typical argument I get, Dr. Levine, is, well, what's the harm? It's not really the point. The point is that those people who happen to be signing last on the sheet don't need to know all of the people that signed in before them, and that's where that becomes very much gray area, and in my view, not all that gray. Open. Dr. Levine?
Yeah, we're still having some audio issues here, unfortunately, so I'm trying to see if we can get it a little bit better. But I wanted to make sure we try to get to as many questions as possible. Now, one of the challenges with some of the other secure email systems out there is that not only does the sender need to be on the system, but all the recipients need to be clients as well. Is that the case for secure mail?
Yeah, it is, but not to fear that. I think that we need to do that only because we want to make sure that there's a complete record of everybody that you have sent information to, when they've read it, and that it's continued to be protected in the same way. A very important part of that subscription when you purchase it is that everyone else can join for free, and you can send an email. You can send that invitation to any email address. So it doesn't matter if they've got a Gmail address or a live address or an AOL address. You can send that invitation. They don't have to learn a new email address, but they do have to, in the very first time that you've sent them an invitation, they'll have to pick a password, is basically all they have to do. Then they become part of the system. Now, the great part about it is that they're protected and you're protected with every further communication, and it's free for them.
Yep. Here's a good question about patient reminders, and I'll tackle part of this, and you can certainly take some of it as well. You know, we're still allowed to send monthly recare postcards.
That sounds good.
Time for your dental checkup. Please call us. My understanding is that postcards, services like Demand Force and Lighthouse and all that stuff are HIPAA compliant. That they don't run afoul of HIPAA rules and regulations, as long as you're sending the minimum information necessary. You know, something like, it's time for your dental checkup, please call us. The one caution I would make is that HIPAA does say that you're not allowed to market to patients. So certainly sending reminders to someone that's a quote-unquote active patient would be fine. If someone hasn't been in the practice for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, something like that, that may be considered marketing, and you may want to be cautious about that. But anything to add to that as far as whether patient reminders run afoul of HIPAA rules and regulations?
Yeah, you bet. Now, one of the things that we're watching very closely is the minimum required rule, because in certain cases, some of the surgeries that we're working with, the oral surgeries, will want to send very specific information about what they should eat for that treatment, or what they should take from a medication perspective. Do take this one, don't take that one. Once you start getting to that level of specificity, you really cannot use and should not use an automated reminder for that type of communication. You really must use a secure system, because now you're talking not just about the fact that they have an appointment with you, but also giving very specific instructions for what's going to happen during that treatment.
Yeah. When it comes to BA agreements, what do you think about people using the ones that are provided by the business associates? Like, a lot of times the software companies will provide one, or the electronic claims clearinghouse. My feeling's always been, you should create your own, or use the one that you're going to provide people, because that really protects you as the covered entity. But do you have any qualms about people using someone else's BAA, or should they really use their own, and that way it's protecting them the best?
Yeah, I certainly recommend that the practices use their own. But there are some companies that won't sign them one at a time because they simply don't have the ability to review them. And so I've seen both. Now, from the practice's perspective, my suggestion certainly is you want to make sure that you've used your own, so that you know exactly what's in there, you know that it's been vetted. And I'm pretty sure, Dr. Levine, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the ADA may even have some resources for some sort of a standard agreement. That is probably a good starting point, but I'll tell you, these laws vary from state to state. And so it really is valuable to be looking at this from a state standpoint. Spend a little bit of money and make sure that you're very comfortable with where it is.
Yeah, I would agree. So a couple of questions here that I'm going to tackle, because these are technical questions. One about a firewall. The thing with HIPAA is that they don't make any specific recommendations on what a firewall should be, and the level of encryption, and what things a firewall should have. don't, if you're working with a company and they say, oh, by the way, this is a HIPAA certified firewall, run for the hills, because there is no such thing. The Office of Civil Rights, which monitors and maintains HIPAA, does not certify hardware or software. They do not, certify training regimens or accreditations or anything like that. We normally find that the firewall that's built into Windows and plus whatever you have with your router, and most of our clients have like a Linksys/Cisco router, that's more than adequate. You can certainly go higher end with a Sonic Wall or Zyxel or one of those, but we just don't find that, you're certainly going to be in compliance with the other firewalls out there. Certainly there are monitoring software programs. This is something that we provide for our clients that would let you know if there's been some hacking attempts, and that's certainly a good investment. The other question here, which is one I'll be happy to tackle, is about using TrueCrypt. TrueCrypt is an encryption program. It was very, very popular for a long time. A couple of years ago, they decided they were not going to continue to develop it. In my mind, it's still very valuable and still perfectly valid. There is a variation of TrueCrypt called VeraCrypt, V-E-R-A Crypt, which is built on the TrueCrypt engine, and it is being supported and developed. So if you have any concerns about that, certainly you could use the VeraCrypt. Both of them are free. So that's what Rohit was mentioning earlier. I mean, yes, you typically, if you don't know what you're doing, you really should invest in having your IT people do it for you. But the software itself is free, so you really shouldn't be spending a lot. So a current Bright Squid has a limited number of recipients. Are you still, is that the way it still works? That you have to limit how many recipients can be on the plan with you?
No, we got rid of that almost a year and a half ago now. So invite as many users as you need. As well, we've since those days we've also added patients, and so you can add up to 2,000 patients in addition to an unlimited number of colleagues with every paid subscription. We're finding thousands of users of patients now on our system that actually, the practice uses it as a selling device, saying that they care about the patient privacy and because of that they've asked them to sign up to Secure Mail.
Okay. That discount, is that ongoing forever, or is that just for this month?
No, I should have been clear. That is ongoing forever. We are still honoring, I think the first time you and I probably had one of these webinars a few years ago, Dr. Levine, we had that same discount available, and we've continued to honor it. It's for as long as you're a subscriber to Bright Squid.
Okay. Question about the Secure Mail. I mean, how is it kept separate? My understanding is that people can still use their existing inbox. It's just, there'll be secure mails that come in that really don't have much information on them because you've got to click on the link, and then the regular emails as well. Is that how it's how most of your clients are using it?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So the nice thing about it is it integrates immediately into your normal workflow. You don't send it to a different email address or anything. There is a slight difference, because now within that email body, when you receive a Secure Mail, it'll come to your normal email address, but there will be a link. You click on that link, it'll immediately take you directly to the Bright Squid website, directly to that message that you just received, and you'll be able to see the two parts, the top part, which is the normal email, and the bottom part, which is the Secure Mail, which has that built-in viewer, so that you can annotate it, you can view multiple files, you can even view the 3D files.
Yeah. What about, I know that you recommend that offices have patients sign up, that they an acknowledgement that they received the privacy policy. Should that be done on an annual basis, or is one time enough?
That it's interesting. I've heard a couple of ways of looking at this. I know that there's some practices, but it's rare. They do ask them to renew them annually, and it just becomes part of the routine. I would have to say that most of the practices that I'm familiar with don't. Listen, it's never a bad practice. I would say that, and certainly if the practice wants to use their adherence to privacy and their concern about privacy, or they want to use it as a differentiator for their staff and for that practice, absolutely nothing wrong with that, for sure.
Okay, and that's in that HIPAA kit that you're going to send out to people that they requested, correct?
You bet. Yeah. Yeah, we'll send it to everybody.
Great. Well, we are running out of time and out of questions. So at this point, I want to end the webinar. I want to thank Rohit for joining us. One of the things about HIPAA is that it's a constantly moving target. There's always new ways to interpret things. HIPAA was purposely left, I think, a little bit gray and ambiguous, which is good in some senses and not so good in another. But every time I listen to Rohit, either the webinar that we do together, or I see him on other webinars, I learn something new, and we really appreciate your time, Rohit. Certainly the offer that they've made, I think, is very generous. You can go to brightsquid.com. You use the discount code Levine. It's L-A-V-I-N-E. You'll get the discount. I mean, $35 a month, or for basically to protect yourself from one of the most common breaches. And you saw some of the fines out there, hundreds of thousands, $1 million plus fines, so easily avoided. One of the things that if you unfortunately ever get audited is that they're going to come in and say, well, what have you done? Have you given us some visibly demonstrable evidence that you've tried to protect the patient confidentiality and security? You can't really make the argument that, well, I didn't think this was really reasonable and appropriate for my practice to do, when it's so inexpensive to protect yourself and protect your patient's confidentiality. So, Rohit, thank you. We appreciate having you here.
My pleasure, Dr. Levine. It's been great again. Looking forward to the next one.
Yeah, we definitely need another one, and we will have another one relatively soon. I think in the next month or so. We were talking about that today. We thank all of you for joining us this evening. We know your time is valuable. Hopefully you got something out of the webinar tonight. As I said, please, if you're thinking about doing some encrypted email, check out brightsquid.com, contact Rohit, get a more in-depth demo if you want, and see if it's the right thing for you. We have literally dozens and dozens and dozens of our clients using the BrightSquid system, the secure mail system, and we're huge fans of it and couldn't recommend it enough. We certainly do these webinars on a regular basis. Once we have our schedule for the next one, we'll send out invitations to everyone. We thank all of you for joining us this evening. For those of you who are still on the call, you will be sent a copy of the CE form. We will be sending the recording out as well. That's usually going to be the next day or so. And feel free to email myself or Rohit if you have any questions. So thank you all again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you all on future webinars. Good night, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.